Hey, what's going on, guys? So, we are back with another video, and I'm sorry for the lighting. I'm just filming this outside the way the sun's sitting right now, casting shadows, and I can't do anything about it. But we are here today with another episode of Cigars for Beginners. Today, we are going to cover two topics, although it's really one topic that I've been wanting to cover for quite some time now. I've just been trying to figure out how to approach it because it's a very multifaceted topic that has a lot of different angles that you can and kind of have to approach it from and things to touch on in order to really kind of encompass the entirety of these topics, right? So, today we're going to be talking about flavor and developing one's palate. This is kind of a controversial topic in the world of cigars because you're kind of split down the middle where you have people who get flavor notes from cigars and people who don't get flavor notes in cigars. That said, there's on both sides a spectrum. I think the best way to approach this is to start with the basics. So we're going to get a little bit sciencey for you guys right now. But bear with me because it is very good knowledge to have and it's kind of important to the rest of what we're going to talk about today. So, what is taste? Taste is simply chemical electric signals that your taste buds send to your nerve endings, and your nerve endings send those to your brain. And then your brain interprets those signals based on your frame of reference. For those of you who don't get a lot of flavor notes or really any flavor notes off of cigars, especially other than just tobacco, right? It's very easy, and I've seen it a lot. I'm in quite a few different cigar communities, and I've seen it where those people try to make fun of, belittle, disrespect, or even try to invalidate those who get flavor notes, especially those who can get a lot of flavor notes. I mean, when you're seeing somebody say that they taste chocolate, caramel, brown sugar, grape, white pepper, whatever, right, in a cigar, generally that person's really tasting that, right? Nobody gets a cookie for saying you taste vanilla in a cigar. Ultimately, most people don't care. There's no echelon that puts you on above the next guy that smokes cigars. So there's no reason to lie about it. Back to what we were just talking about, how it's just chemical electric signals. All that's happening is that the foods you eat, the substances you consume, have chemical compounds in them. Everything you can consume has chemical compounds in it. Those chemical compounds are a large part of what produce things like flavor and aroma. Your taste buds are only a small fraction of what amounts to the experience of taste. Your olfactory senses, getting a little sciencey on you guys again, but your olfactory senses, or for those of you who don't know what that means, your sense of smell actually accounts for 80 to 90% of what you experience as taste. This is why a lot of times you can actually physically taste something you're smelling, or you can taste something and it reminds you of a scent. This is, if you've ever found yourself in that position where you're like, wow, this tastes like that thing smells. Why does this relate to cigars? It's because cigars are plants. Plants have chemical compounds. Tobacco has a laundry list of naturally occurring chemical compounds. Some of these chemical compounds affect the smell of the cigar. Others affect the taste. You have things like esters, volatile fatty acids, amino acids, aldehydes, pyrazines, pyridines, terpenoids, flavonoids. The list goes on, right? And something like a pyrazine contributes a nutty flavor, right? So if you're smoking a cigar that has tobacco in it that's really high in pyrazines, you might experience a nutty flavor. It could be peanuts, it could be cashews, it could be walnuts, it could be just a general nuttiness. Things like esters contribute potentially a fruity flavor, a waxy or creamy note to the thing you're smoking. The fatty acids can contribute a lot by way of, say, Maillard reactions to what you're tasting. So if we know that taste is simply your brain's interpretation of the chemical compounds reacting with your taste buds and your olfactory senses, then it shouldn't be too hard to believe that you can get various tastes, various flavor notes from the chemical compounds that occur in tobacco. And then those flavors can be augmented with things like fermentation and age and post-secondary fermentation. Back to the basics. There's only 5 main flavors that your taste buds taste: bitter, sweet, sour, salty, and savory, or umami. Everything you're tasting is generally some combination of those things. Now, to make this make even more sense to you, think about drinking a cherry soda. And on the label, it literally says artificially flavored. That's because the cherry soda that you're drinking that tastes like cherries has no cherry in it. Just like the cigar you're smoking that you can taste the cherry note in has no cherries in it. There's no fruit whatsoever. See my cat in the background. There's no fruit whatsoever in that soda you're drinking, and yet it tastes like fruit, like a very specific fruit, like cherry. Same with grape soda and orange soda. That's because these flavors were made in a lab. What's happening is they're artificially creating chemical compounds that look chemically, structurally, like what gives an orange its distinctive flavor, what gives a cherry its distinctive flavor, and various naturally occurring chemical compounds that occur in pretty much anything: whiskey, alcohol, tobacco, a piece of lumber, whatever the case is, those can produce flavor. So if you have tobacco, which has all of these naturally occurring chemical compounds that can all attribute various flavors or aromas to that cigar, then it should be pretty straightforward by this point in the explanation to understand how a cigar can potentially produce a wide array of flavors. And then this can, again, be enhanced by the cultivation, where it was grown, how it was grown, how it was fertilized, the soil it was grown in, the mineral composition of that soil, the nutrient density of that soil, the phenotype of the leaf that is being grown, the fermentation process, how much it's been fermented, how long it's been aged. Cigars can even undergo post-secondary fermentation while you're storing them, depending on the conditions that they're stored in. This is what we consider aging in a lot of cases, right? And then even over time, just those chemical compounds can break down. And as certain ones break down, others become more prominent. So the flavor profile of a cigar can be drastically different 6 months later, 6 years later. And then you have people, and this is actually a legitimate term, who are what we call super tasters. These are people who have unusually high density of taste buds in their mouth, which allow them to taste more flavors more intensely, more distinctly. Now, is everybody that's sitting here calling out various flavors in a cigar tasting, are they a super taster? No, not necessarily. But you don't necessarily have to be either. In the process of developing one's palate to distinctly taste individual flavor notes is something that can be honed by any individual. And it's also something that's not unique to cigars. Wine tasters do it all the time, as well as people who like various spirits, whether it's whiskey, rum, whatever the case is. This is largely what we mean by an acquired taste. But that said, we're going to now get into developing your palate and things you can do to help develop your palate and increase the amount of flavor that you can pull from a cigar. All right, so now that I've bored you with the science of flavor, in the second part of this video, we are going to give you tips on things that you can do to help develop your palate and pull more flavor from your cigars, and thus improving your cigar experience. First and arguably most important tip that I can give you in developing your palate is to smoke often and smoke with variety. Now, this is especially important for newbies and infrequent smokers. Why? Because you have to acclimate your palate. If you do not acclimate your palate, then the boldest, strongest, most prominent flavors associated with that cigar are going to be all you taste. And 10 times out of 10, it's going to be tobacco more than anything. So what ends up happening in terms of acclimating your palate is your taste buds become desensitized to the strongest of flavors here, which allows the less prominent secondary flavors, subtle flavors, nuances to become much more accessible to you. You become much more aware of those things because it's just like whiskey or challenging foods, right? If you taste whiskey and you're not a whiskey drinker, all you're going to taste is the ethanol and maybe the oak, but you have no frame of reference for oak, which we'll get to that later. You have no frame of reference for oak, so you don't even know you're tasting oak. All you taste is ethanol and wood. Same thing with challenging foods, right? If you try a different culture's food than what you're used to, right? Initially, it's very overwhelming. There's so much going on. It might not be an enjoyable experience for you in that moment because you're so overwhelmed. You don't know what you're tasting. But the more experience, the more exposure you have to those foods, then the more enjoyable it can become for you because the stronger, more prominent flavors or characteristics of those flavor profiles become more tolerable and less noticeable. And then you could start to kind of see more of the other flavors that are in there and then how those all meld together. And it can be a much, much more enjoyable experience. Cigars are largely the same way. So once your palate acclimates, it becomes a lot easier for you to pick up more flavors. Variety also helps develop your palate because now you'll be able to start picking up the differences in different tobaccos instead of just the blend or cigar that you like to smoke. You're smoking other things, and now you can see how Connecticut broadleafs differ from Nicaraguan Habanos and how those differ from Ecuadorian Habanos and how those differ from Ecuadorian Connecticut's and how those differ from USA Connecticut's, right? So smoke often and with variety. The next tip that I can give you, this is why I say that the first one's arguably the most important. It kind of depends on where you're at in your journey. Expand your frame of reference for flavors. This simply means to broaden the amount of flavors that you can consistently recognize by becoming more familiar with more flavors. This can be achieved in many ways, but there are two main ways that I'm going to give to you that you can use to expand the amount of flavors that you're familiar with. The first one would simply be adding variety to your diet. Just how I mentioned that new foods can be challenging at first until you become acclimated to those types of food, those new spices, etc. It's the exact same thing here, except the exposure to those other foods using new spices gets you familiar with those spices, those different flavor profiles. So a lot of people end up eating the same foods over and over and over again, day in, day out, drinking the same drinks over and over and over again, day in and day out. And so they don't get a lot of exposure to new foods unless they travel, right? Once they travel, they start to taste different foods from different cultures. They use different spices, but that's something that you can do here at home, especially in America, right? So step outside your comfort zone and try new foods, try new beverages, both hot and cold. This will expose your palate to different foods, different spices, different flavors. And when you become familiar with those flavors, it becomes easier to identify them, right? So the first tip is about desensitizing yourself and giving yourself that physical ability to pick out more flavors. This tip is about becoming familiar with those flavors so that when you taste them, you know what you're tasting, right? The other way of expanding your frame of reference for flavor is to use an aroma kit. Now, an aroma kit is a tool that sommeliers, wine tasters, and other professional tasters use to familiarize themselves with different flavors and aromas. Now, what an aroma kit is just a kit that comes with vials. Each of those vials is filled with a liquid, and those vials have a specific scent in them, right? Some vials might have vanilla, some might have cardamom, some might have cinnamon, some might have oak, some might have a leather. What you do is take the top off, you smell them to familiarize yourself with that scent, and then you can start playing games. A lot of times they come with like cards and stuff, so the vials might just have a number, and you smell it and you guess what it is, and then you find the corresponding card, and then that will tell you what that smell was and whether or not you were right or wrong. The better you get at this, the easier it becomes to distinguish different flavors and aromas. Now, why is this? Well, back to the science that I gave you guys earlier, your sense of smell is 80 to 90% of your perception of flavor and your sense of taste. The more astute your nose is at identifying aromas, the more astute your palate will be at identifying flavors. So there's several different ways to go about that. You can go online and grab some. This one in particular is a pretty good one, and it's customizable. So if you're looking for a specific set of flavors, you can go ahead and do that. Now, the thing I recommend, though, is that if you're not serious about flavor notes, don't spend your money, because these kits are not cheap. You're talking several $100s. And if you don't have the disposable income, or you're not going to make the most of this and use it consistently, to help train your palate and train your nose, then it's just a waste of money. But if this is a way that interests you, intrigues you, and you're serious about it, be my guest. One thing that gets overlooked in this whole cigar thing is preparing your palate. So if your goal is just to have a cigar because you like cigars, you like the process, the routine, you need to take some time to yourself, don't worry about it. Smoke whenever you want. But if you really want to get the most flavor out of your cigars, then you have to prepare your palate. That could mean cleansing your palate, or in my case, that usually means smoking on a fresh palate. If I'm doing like one of my reviews, right, or I'm trying a cigar for the first time, I'm typically going to smoke it on a fresh palate. So for me, what that means is first thing in the morning, I've had no food, I've had no drinks with any flavors in them. I've probably only had water up to that point, if anything, and then I'm going to smoke that cigar fresh palate. The reason why I would do this is because my taste buds are at their peak sensitivity. I haven't had any food for at least 8 hours, probably longer, and that has allowed me to essentially kind of reset my taste buds, and now they're ready and raring to go. So I'm going to pull the most amount of flavor possible from that cigar. My taste buds are going to be as sensitive as they possibly could. And you also have to take into account that any food and drink you have before then will do two things. It can directly influence the flavors that you are now tasting in that cigar. It can potentially enhance a cigar, but it usually doesn't. It at best muddies up the flavors that you're going to taste. But it can also make the cigar taste worse depending on what you had prior. And this could be based on either your food or the drink you've had, right? You have to consider everything you've had throughout the day: food, drink, bubble gum, all of that, right? And another way that it can negatively affect your experience in the cigar is that it can fatigue your taste buds. So they just become all around less sensitive because they've just been bombarded with flavor all day, every day, right? So prepare your palate. If you have had anything before your cigar, then attempt to cleanse your palate. This can be done with water. This can be done with like plain bread, plain crackers, things of that nature that can help wash away any residuals from the previous meal that you had, or snack that you had, or drink that you had, and kind of help refresh your taste buds a little bit. It's not going to be as good as if you smoked it on the fresh palate, but it'll definitely help out. And in line with that, the fourth thing that you can do is remove distractions. So I actually rarely ever smoke my best sticks, at parties, at functions, socializing with friends. And the reason being is because nowadays I smoke for flavor as much as I smoke for routine and mindfulness, right? Even more so in some cases. So if I'm smoking my cigar, I am focused on that cigar because I'm trying to get as much out of that cigar, flavor wise and experience wise, as I possibly can, right? Well, if I'm at a function, at a party, if I'm at an event, if I'm socializing with friends, then my mind is not focused on that cigar. It's focused on me socializing, right? It's focused on me being aware of my surroundings. It's focused on pretty much everything but the cigar I'm smoking. So with that said, I'm not going to get all of the flavors I usually would out of that cigar. I'm probably also, I probably also have eaten food. I've probably also drank alcohol or, something strong flavor. It could be fruit punch, who the hell knows. But I'm generally not going to have a fresh palate, and I'm usually not going to be focused on the cigar that I'm smoking, both of which are a recipe for having a mid or even average experience, or even potentially below average experience in smoking a cigar. Some of my favorite cigars I've smoked at parties or events, and I didn't really enjoy them as much as I typically would, or at all, honestly, which kind of sucks. So again, I'm just saying to remove distractions. So don't do anything that requires your real focus, your time and attention, simply because it may detract from your experience in smoking a cigar and lessen the flavors that you can get, especially if we're talking about subtle and nuanced flavors that actually require your attention to pick up. Generally, if I'm smoking, especially my good stuff, I'm at home in my space, relaxed, I'm chilling. If I am doing something other than just smoking that cigar, it's usually something that I can basically do on autopilot. So I'm not really focused on anything else. And I'm just trying to get the best experience possible from my cigar. The next thing that you can do to help develop your palate and improve your experience is to learn. Know what you're smoking, right? Understand the blend that you're smoking. This is why when you guys see me do my videos, my reviews especially, I'm giving you the breakdown of the leaves that are in here, right? Do some research. Look into, what habanos are, what maduros are. Look into the characteristics from of the tobacco that grows in different countries of origin and even specific regions within that country. It can help go a long way to help you train your palate and your mind as well. It can give you a little bit of a precursor as to what to expect from the cigar that you're about to smoke, and then you can apply that to your experience and see if any of that holds true. And then if it doesn't, you can, ask yourself more questions like, is that because my palate can't detect that? Or is that because that's just not the experience I get? Or is it because it's bullshit? Right. But all of it matters. So learn, do research, research your blenders, research your regions, research your different tobacco types, right? Where that comes from, know what you're smoking. It can go a long way. That kind of plays off the whole knowing the flavors you're tasting thing. But this is kind of like the next level of that. Understand what you're smoking. When a wine taster goes and tastes a wine, they want to know the region, they want to know the vintage, the chateau it came from, all of that, because that gives them a baseline level of what to expect and something that they can cross-reference their knowledge with their actual experience. Trust me, goes a long way. And in line with that, the next thing you can do is to keep a record, right? So for some of you, that might look like having a notebook, and every time you go and smoke a cigar, right, you write down your date, you write down your time, you write down what you had before, you write down the blend, you write down the manufacturer, right, you write down the vitola, and then you, as you're smoking it, write down your experience, the flavors you got, how it burned. If you have a humidimeter, what percentage was it at? If you don't, then how it felt in your hands, maybe how it smelled, the humidor was kept in, all that, right? Keep track of all of that, because then you can cross-reference your next experience with that cigar, whether it be on a fresh palate or not, whatever, with that previous experience. All of which help train you to have a discerning palate and pay attention to these things as they're happening, which becomes easier and easier and easier to the point where it's second nature. Lastly, be patient. Cigars in general, this hobby is an exercise in patience, from the macro all the way to the micro, right? From the time it takes the manufacturer to cultivate and produce these leaves, to ferment them, then some blender to come in, multiple iterations, and finally make this cigar, and then make tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of these cigars, and then ship them out to the world, and then eventually to your B&M or your online vendor, which you then have to order from. And then that takes time, all the way down to you potentially aging a cigar, or even further in the micro, you smoking the cigar, right? The cigar is a hour and a half, 2 hour commitment, you know, and there's variance in there, obviously, but once you spark that cigar, this is what you're doing now for the next couple hours. It forces you to slow down, mindfulness, patience. But patience is involved in every aspect of the cigar. So includes developing your palate. It doesn't happen right away. Happens sooner than later for others, depending on how, you know, how your mouth is set up, depending on how focused you are on it, how intent you are on developing your palate, right? Lots of different things can influence that. How often you are able to smoke, you know, is something that can influence how long it takes you to develop your palate. So it's definitely something that it requires patience. So be patient, be open to it, and be patient. That wraps up this episode of Cigars for Beginners, and me hopefully helping some of you out there develop your palate and broaden your experience with cigars. And this isn't just cigars. This entire video is applicable to pretty much anything, whether it's cigars, whether it's whiskey, whether it's wine, whether it's coffee, whether it's fucking cheese. It doesn't really matter. This is very, very applicable to having any kind of experience that in this case involves taste and smell. So hopefully I've helped some of you guys out there, or at least steered a few of you in the right direction. And it's a very difficult thing to kind of teach because, again, taste is a very subjective experience. So to try and distill this whole process, which can vary from person to person, it down from something that's obviously subjective into something that's objective and applicable in every situation to everybody is kind of difficult. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, and hopefully it's helped at least some of you at the very least. But per the usual, guys, I appreciate the love and support, and I will catch you guys on the next one.